The engine of Alex's car purred softly as they pulled into the empty parking lot of St. George's Hospital. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the old stone structure. The hospital had stood here for over a century, its Gothic architecture a relic of another era. Alex turned off the engine and stared up at the imposing building, a mixture of curiosity and unease bubbling in their chest. This was their first night shift at St. George's, a new job that promised a hefty paycheck and the kind of solitude Alex often sought. A seasoned medical imaging technician, they had worked with X-rays and MRIs for years, troubleshooting machines in high-pressure environments. Night work suited them, quiet, focused, with minimal interruptions. Yet, something about this place felt different. Gathering their bag, Alex stepped out of the car. The cold night air bit at their cheeks, and the faint sound of rustling leaves echoed through the empty lot. A lone street lamp flickered at the edge of the parking area, its weak light doing little to dispel the shadows. Alex took a deep breath and walked toward the hospital's entrance, their footsteps crunching against the gravel path. The lobby was a stark contrast to the exterior. While the outside screamed of age and history, the inside had been remodeled, bright white walls, sleek tiles, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights greeted Alex as they stepped in. A receptionist sat behind a glass window, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen. She looked up as Alex approached, her expression polite but distant. "You must be the new tech," she said, handing over a clipboard without much ceremony. "Margaret will meet you by the imaging wing. Just follow the signs." "Thanks," Alex replied, their voice steady. They glanced down at the clipboard, noting the map and list of protocols attached. Turning toward the hall, they followed the signs marked imaging wing. The hospital seemed deserted, the usual daytime bustle replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. Alex's curiosity piqued with every step. The imaging wing was tucked away at the far end of the hospital, its halls lined with outdated medical posters and the occasional vending machine. As Alex approached the double doors leading to the wing, a woman in scrubs appeared. Her badge read Margaret Dean, head nurse. She was middle-aged, with sharp features softened by a tired but kind smile. "Alex, right?" she greeted. "I'm Margaret. Glad to have you here. Nights can get tricky, but I'm sure you'll manage." "Tricky how?" Alex asked, tilting their head. The curiosity in their voice was evident, though they kept their expression neutral. Margaret hesitated, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh, you know, machines acting up, patients coming in with odd cases. Nothing you can't handle." She gestured for Alex to follow her. "Let me show you around." The imaging wing was smaller than Alex had anticipated. There was a central control room with monitors and computers, flanked by individual rooms housing the MRI and X-ray machines. Margaret gave a brief overview of the equipment before handing Alex a laminated sheet of rules. "You'll want to keep these in mind," she said, her tone unusually serious. "The night shift here, it's a bit different." Alex scanned the list. The first few rules were standard operating procedures, checking the machines, logging any issues, but the latter half made their brow furrow. "Do not engage in conversation with the man in the white coat if you see him near the MRI room. If the MRI machine emits unusual sounds, power it down immediately and do not investigate further. If you notice a reflection on the control room screens but no one is in the room, leave the area at once." Alex looked up. "What is this? Some kind of initiation joke?" Margaret didn't laugh. Her expression remained unreadable. "Just follow the rules. You'll be fine." Alex nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. They folded the paper and slipped it into their pocket. Whatever this was, they would figure it out. They always did. The rest of the orientation was uneventful. Margaret showed Alex the break room, the emergency exits, and the staff lockers before leaving them to settle in. "I'll be on the other end of the hospital if you need me," she said. "Good luck." As the doors swung shut behind her, Alex exhaled and looked around. The control room felt both sterile and stifling, its fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows on the walls. They set their bag down and began checking the machines. Everything seemed in order, no errors, no strange noises. For now, Hours passed in relative quiet. Alex reviewed system logs, calibrated the X-ray machine, and jotted notes in the logbook. But as the clock neared midnight, a faint tapping sound broke the silence. They paused, listening. The sound seemed to be coming from the MRI room. Curiosity flared, tempered by the unease of Margaret's earlier warnings. Alex stood and walked toward the room, their footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate. It stopped abruptly as Alex reached the door. Peering through the observation window, Alex saw nothing unusual. The machine was idle, its console dark, but the room felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Brushing off the sensation, Alex opened the door and stepped inside. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. Alex checked the machine's console. Everything was offline, as it should be. Then, from the corner of their eye, they saw it, a faint shadow flickering across the far wall. They turned sharply, but the room was empty. Shaking their head, Alex chalked it up to fatigue. They returned to the control room, determined to focus on their tasks. But the unease lingered, a gnawing sensation at the back of their mind. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences multiplied. The X-ray machine produced an image of an empty room, except for a shadowy figure standing in the corner. The lights flickered intermittently, plunging the wing into brief moments of darkness. And then there were the whispers, faint and indistinct, echoing through the halls. By 3 a.m., Alex's nerves were fraying. They leaned back in the chair, rubbing their temples. "Get a grip," they muttered to themselves. "It's just an old building, nothing more." But deep down, they weren't so sure. Alex's shift continued, the hours creeping forward in agonizing slowness. The control room's sterile lighting only served to amplify the oppressive quiet of the imaging wing. Every now and then, the faint hum of the machines or the distant groan of the hospital's infrastructure broke the silence. But it wasn't enough to distract from the strange feeling that had settled in Alex's chest, a sense that they weren't truly alone. It began again with the tapping. This time, it was louder and more rhythmic. Coming from the X-ray room, Alex froze in their chair, heart pounding. The laminated rules Margaret had given them surfaced in their memory, particularly the line about unusual sounds. But this was an X-ray machine, not the MRI. Surely it couldn't be connected. After a moment's hesitation, Alex grabbed a flashlight and approached the X-ray room. The tapping stopped as soon as they reached the door. Slowly, Alex pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was as they had left it, cold, sterile, and empty. Yet something felt off. The machine's console emitted a faint glow, though it had been powered down an hour ago. Faulty wiring. Maybe, Alex muttered, trying to sound more confident than they felt. They approached the machine, checking the console for any signs of activity. The screen flickered once, then twice, before an image appeared. It was a chest X-ray, but something was wrong. The lungs were perfectly clear, but the image showed a shadow, a humanoid silhouette with long, spindly limbs curled up inside the ribcage. Alex stared at the screen, their breath catching in their throat. Then the image blinked out, replaced by static. "Nope," Alex said aloud, backing away from the machine. Their voice sounded small and shaky in the empty room. They turned and left quickly, closing the door behind them. Back in the control room, Alex tried to shake off the growing unease. They sank into the chair and opened the logbook, intending to distract themselves with routine. But as they flipped through the pages, they noticed something odd. A page that had been blank earlier now bore a single handwritten line in the middle of the page. "Have you seen him yet?" Alex slammed the book shut and pushed it away, their heart racing. It had to be a prank, they told themselves. Maybe one of the other staff members had written it earlier, but the handwriting didn't look familiar, and they were sure it hadn't been there before. A noise from the hallway drew their attention. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder, a steady, shuffling sound. Alex stood, their pulse quickening. Grabbing the flashlight again, they moved cautiously toward the door. The hallway was empty, bathed in dim, flickering light. Alex stepped out, scanning both directions. To the left, the corridor stretched toward the main hospital, its shadows twisting and shifting as the lights flickered. To the right, The hall ended at the MRI room. A figure stood at the far end of the right hallway. Alex froze. The man was tall and thin, dressed in a pristine white coat that seemed to gleam in the low light. His back was to Alex, and he stood unnervingly still, as though carved from stone. Margaret's warning echoed in Alex's mind. Do not engage in conversation with the man in the white coat. The figure didn't move. Alex held their breath, stepping backward toward the control room. As their foot brushed the threshold, the man in the white coat tilted his head, ever so slightly, as though listening. Alex didn't wait to see if he would turn around. They slipped back into the control room and locked the door. Their hands trembling, they sank into the chair, trying to calm their breathing. It's nothing, they whispered to themselves. Just a weird old building with weird noises and weird people. But the reassurance rang hollow. They felt watched, as though unseen eyes were fixed on them from every corner of the room. Another noise shattered their fragile composure, a soft, rhythmic knock on the control room door. Alex's blood ran cold. The knock came again, louder this time. They stood slowly, their eyes fixed on the door. The laminated rules flashed through their mind. If someone knocks on the door and you are not expecting visitors, do not open it. Who's there? Alex called, their voice trembling. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, low and raspy, spoke from the other side. Do you see me? Alex backed away from the door, their chest tightening. They didn't answer, remembering the warning about the woman with no face. The voice came again, louder this time. Do you see me? The doorknob rattled, and Alex felt their resolve cracking. They turned to the control room monitors, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, was outside. But the screens showed nothing. The hallway outside the door was empty. The knocking resumed, more insistent now. Alex's heart pounded in their ears. They grabbed their bag and darted toward the emergency exit, unwilling to spend another second in the control room. The door slammed behind them as they burst into the hallway, their flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hospital seemed different now. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. Alex hurried toward the stairwell, hoping to find Margaret or anyone who could explain what was happening. But as they reached the landing, they stopped in their tracks. A child stood at the bottom of the stairs. It was a boy, no older than 6 or 7, with pale skin and hollow eyes. He wore a hospital gown that hung loosely on his thin frame. But it wasn't his appearance that froze Alex in place. It was the fact that he cast no shadow. The stairwell was dimly lit, but the boy's form should have been outlined against the wall. Instead, there was nothing. Are you lost? Alex asked, their voice shaking. They knew they shouldn't engage, but their instincts overrode their better judgment. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he smiled a slow, unsettling grin that sent a chill down Alex's spine. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Alex didn't follow. They turned and bolted up the stairs, their footsteps echoing loudly in the empty stairwell. When they reached the next floor, they paused to catch their breath. The hallway ahead was silent, but the oppressive feeling of being watched hadn't lifted. The sound of footsteps behind them made Alex whirl around. The boy stood at the top of the stairs, his empty eyes locked onto Alex. He smiled again, wider this time, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. Alex ran. They sprinted down the hallway, not caring where it led. Doors blurred past them as they focused solely on escaping. The oppressive feeling grew stronger, the shadows seeming to close in around them. Finally, they stumbled into a storage room and slammed the door shut behind them. The room was pitch dark, save for the faint glow of Alex's flashlight. They leaned against the door, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The boy's smile haunted their mind, a twisted image they couldn't shake. As they scanned the room, their flashlight beam landed on a mirror mounted on the wall. For a moment, Alex felt a flicker of relief. At least they could see their own reflection, proof that they were still grounded in reality. But then their reflection moved. Alex froze, staring at the mirror. The reflection raised its hand, pressing it against the glass. Though Alex hadn't moved, slowly, its lips curled into a smile, a wide, predatory grin, the same grin as the boy on the stairs. The lights flickered, and the reflection was gone. Alex dropped the flashlight, their trembling hands clutching the door handle. They had to get out. Now, the hospital seemed to come alive as they fled. Machines hummed to life in empty rooms, and faint whispers echoed through the halls. Shadows shifted and danced, taking on forms that defied logic. Alex didn't stop running until they burst into the main lobby, their heart hammering in their chest. Margaret was there, her face pale but calm. She looked up as Alex stumbled toward her, their face etched with terror. "I told you," she said softly. "Just follow the rules." The early morning air was cold and biting as Alex sat in their car, staring at the hospital's dark silhouette in the rearview mirror. They had fled without saying another word to Margaret, their mind reeling from the night's events. No paycheck, no career advancement, and no curiosity were worth the horrors they had experienced. Yet, as they gripped the steering wheel, a strange, insidious thought crept into their mind. What if it wasn't over? The question clung to Alex like a shadow, haunting their every waking moment. The reflection in the mirror, the boy with no shadow, the man in the white coat, they weren't just things that could be left behind. They had seen Alex. A feeling deeper than fear settled in their chest, a bone-deep certainty that leaving the hospital didn't mean escaping it. The following day, Alex tried to shake off the lingering dread. They stayed home, locked every door, and avoided looking into mirrors. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it brought twisted dreams of empty hospital corridors and distorted figures chasing them through endless halls. Each time Alex woke, gasping for air, they felt the same oppressive sensation of being watched. By the time night fell, Alex was a wreck. They paced their small apartment, every creak and shadow setting their nerves on edge. Their phone buzzed on the table, startling them. It was a text from an unknown number. "You didn't finish your shift." Alex's stomach churned. Their hands trembled as they typed a reply. "Who is this?" No response. Minutes ticked by, then hours. But the silence was worse than any answer. As the night dragged on, Alex's paranoia grew. They couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was waiting for them to return to the hospital. The next night, Alex made a decision that felt both reckless and necessary. They needed answers. Closure. Anything to make the oppressive dread stop. Armed with a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a stubborn resolve, Alex drove back to St. George's Hospital. The parking lot was empty when they arrived, just as it had been the first night. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows like vacant eyes. Alex hesitated for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly, before stepping out of the car. The lobby was as silent as ever. The receptionist's desk was unoccupied, and the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed louder in the stillness. Alex's footsteps echoed as they made their way toward the imaging wing. When they reached the control room, they found it exactly as they had left it, except for one detail. The laminated list of rules was now taped to the monitor, the edges curling slightly. Someone had scrawled a new line at the bottom in shaky handwriting. "Finish what you started." Alex's jaw tightened. They had no idea what finishing entailed, but the idea of staying another minute in this place made their skin crawl. Still, their curiosity, stubborn as always, urged them forward. They began by checking the machines. The MRI was quiet, its console displaying the usual diagnostic data. The X-ray machine appeared functional, though Alex shuddered at the memory of the shadowy figure from the night before. As they moved through the room, they couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in, that the air itself was watching them. Then came the tapping. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the machines, but it grew louder with each passing second. Alex turned toward the sound, their flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. The noise was coming from the MRI room. They approached cautiously, heart pounding. As they reached the door, the tapping stopped. Alex hesitated before pushing the door open, their flashlight illuminating the room beyond. It was empty, at least. It appeared to be. But then they noticed the console. The MRI was powered on, its screen flickering with static. Alex stepped closer, their flashlight beam steady. As they approached, the static began to resolve into an image. It was the control room. Alex's breath hitched. The screen displayed a live feed of the very room they had just left. The camera panned slowly, as though searching for something. Then it stopped, zooming in on the doorway. The door to the control room creaked open on the feed, though Alex had left it closed. A figure stepped into the frame. It was the man in the white coat. Alex stumbled backward, their flashlight flickering. They turned to run, but the door to the MRI room slammed shut, trapping them inside. The lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting the room into strobing darkness. The tapping resumed, louder and faster, coming from all around. "Stop!" Alex shouted, their voice trembling. "What do you want?" The tapping ceased. The silence was deafening. Then, a voice, slow, distorted, and unmistakably inhuman, whispered in Alex's ear. "See me." The lights cut out completely. When Alex woke, they were lying on the floor of the MRI room. Their head throbbed, and their flashlight was gone. The room was bathed in an eerie red glow, the source of which they couldn't identify. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though it were alive. They staggered to their feet, their mind racing. The laminated rules were clear. When things like this happened, the best course of action was to leave. But the door was locked, and the only way out was through the control room, where the man in the white coat had last been seen. Gathering their courage, Alex pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. The hospital felt different now, as though the very structure had shifted. The walls seemed to pulse. The floor creaked under their weight, and the shadows moved as if they had a will of their own. Alex's flashlight beam landed on a figure at the end of the corridor. It was the boy with no shadow, standing perfectly still, his hollow eyes fixed on Alex. His lips moved silently, forming words Alex couldn't hear. "No," Alex whispered, stepping back, but the boy didn't move. Instead, the shadows around him stretched and twisted, reaching toward Alex like skeletal hands. Alex turned and ran. The hospital became a labyrinth, its hallways looping back on themselves no matter which direction they took. Doors led to rooms that didn't exist, and the few signs of normalcy, vending machines, posters, the occasional chair, seemed warped and distorted. They finally stumbled into a room they didn't recognize, its walls lined with old medical equipment. A large mirror dominated one wall, cracked and fogged with age. As Alex approached, they saw their reflection, or what should have been their reflection. The figure in the mirror wasn't Alex. It wore their face, but its eyes were black voids, and its expression was twisted into a predatory grin. The reflection raised a hand, beckoning Alex forward. "No," Alex said again, their voice barely audible. They backed away, but the reflection didn't stay confined to the mirror. It stepped out, its movements fluid and unnatural. Alex screamed. The morning light found Alex outside the hospital, their clothes torn and their hands trembling. They had no memory of how they escaped, only fragments of the nightmare that had unfolded within. The hospital loomed behind them, silent and unyielding. Margaret's words echoed in their mind, "Just follow the rules." Alex knew one thing for certain: they would never return to St. George's Hospital. But as they drove away, their rearview mirror caught a glimpse of something impossible. The boy with no shadow stood at the edge of the parking lot, his hollow eyes watching Alex's car disappear into the distance. Alex drove through the quiet city streets, their hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that their knuckles turned white. The boy's empty eyes still lingered in their mind, his hollow gaze etched into their memory. No matter how far Alex got from St. George's Hospital, the oppressive sensation of being watched refused to leave. The apartment offered no solace. Its once familiar walls now seemed foreign, shadows pooling in corners that had never felt so dark. Alex bolted the door and checked every room, opening closets and pulling back curtains, though they knew it was futile. Whatever had taken hold of their life wasn't bound by locks or physical spaces. They slumped onto the couch, burying their face in their hands. Sleep was impossible. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the hospital, its twisting halls, the distorted figures, and that accursed mirror. Alex's thoughts spiraled into a single, overwhelming question. What did it want from me? The answer came sooner than expected. The first sign was subtle. The television flickered on by itself, static filling the screen. Alex stared at it, heart pounding. They reached for the remote to turn it off, but before they could, An image emerged from the static, a grainy, black and white feed of the hospital's control room. Alex froze. The room on the screen was empty at first, the door swinging slightly as though recently opened. Then, slowly, the man in the white coat stepped into view. He moved unnaturally, his limbs stiff and jerky, his head tilting as though searching for something. Alex's breath caught as the man turned toward the camera. His face was obscured, but the movement sent a shiver down their spine. Suddenly, his hand reached forward, and the feed cut to black. The TV powered off. Alex sat frozen for what felt like an eternity before they finally stood. Every instinct told them to leave the apartment. But where could they go? The hospital had followed them, invaded their space. There was no running from it. The text message came next. "We need you. Come back." The sender was unknown, but Alex didn't need to guess who or what had sent it. Their phone buzzed again. "Finish what you started." Alex's mind raced. How could they finish something they didn't understand? Returning to the hospital felt like suicide, but ignoring the messages seemed equally dangerous. For all their fear, a tiny spark of curiosity burned within them. If they didn't confront this now, it would never stop. By midnight, Alex was back in the parking lot of St. George's Hospital. The building loomed before them, its windows dark and uninviting. Alex took a deep breath, steeling themselves before stepping out of the car. The lobby was eerily quiet, the faint hum of the lights now a familiar and unsettling background noise. The laminated rules were taped to the reception desk this time, the handwriting more frantic. Someone had added another line, "Don't let them see your fear." Alex clenched their jaw, determined to remain calm. They made their way toward the imaging wing, every shadow in the corridor seeming to shift and writhe. The control room was just as they remembered it, though the monitors now displayed static. On the desk was a small envelope with their names scrawled on it in uneven handwriting. Alex hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. It was a group of hospital staff, their faces solemn. Standing in the back row was the man in the white coat. Alex turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written, "He sees you." A noise behind them made Alex spin around. The door to the control room was ajar, though they were certain they'd closed it. Swallowing their fear, Alex stepped into the hallway. It stretched endlessly before them, the lights flickering erratically. At the far end, a figure stood motionless. It was the woman with no face. Alex's breath hitched as she began to move, her steps slow and deliberate. In one hand, she clutched a tattered X-ray film, holding it out as though offering it to Alex. Her head tilted, and though she had no eyes, Alex felt her gaze piercing them. "Do you see me?" she asked, her voice soft but chilling. Alex turned and ran, their footsteps echoing loudly in the empty hall. The woman's question followed them, her voice growing louder with each repetition. "Do you see me? Do you see me?" They didn't stop running until they reached the MRI room. Slamming the door shut, Alex leaned against it, their chest heaving. The room was dark, the only light coming from the machine's console, which flickered faintly. A voice crackled through the intercom, low and distorted. "Welcome back." Alex spun around, scanning the room for the source. The voice continued, its tone mocking. "You left us unfinished. Don't you want to see the end?" "End of what?" Alex shouted, their voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The intercom fell silent, but the MRI machine began to hum. Its screen displayed the same grainy feed from the television earlier, a live view of the control room. The man in the white coat was there again, but this time, he wasn't alone. The boy with no shadow stood beside him, his hollow eyes fixed on the camera. The screen flickered, and Alex saw something that made their blood run cold. The live feed shifted to show the MRI room itself. Alex was on the screen, but they weren't alone. Behind them stood their reflection. It was twisted and wrong, its dark eyes staring hungrily. Before Alex could react, the reflection moved. A cold hand gripped their shoulder, and Alex screamed. When Alex woke, they were lying on a hospital bed. The room was unfamiliar, the walls lined with peeling paint and old medical equipment. They sat up slowly, their body aching as though they had been running for hours. The man in the white coat stood at the foot of the bed, His head tilted as he studied Alex. This was the first time Alex had seen his face clearly. His features were sharp, almost skeletal, his eyes hollow and void of humanity. "You came back," he said, his voice low and echoing. "Good." Alex's throat was dry. "What do you want from me?" they croaked. The man didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph Alex had found earlier, holding it up for them to see. "We've been waiting," he said. "You're part of this now." "Part of what?" Alex demanded, their voice rising. "I didn't ask for this." The man smiled, a cold, lifeless expression that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. "It doesn't matter. You belong to us." The room began to shift, the walls twisting and warping. Shadows pooled at the edges of Alex's vision, and the air grew heavy. The man stepped closer, his hollow eyes locking onto Alex's. "Don't let them see your fear," he whispered. The words echoed in Alex's mind as the world around them dissolved into darkness. When Alex woke again, they were in their car, parked in the hospital lot. The building loomed ahead, silent and foreboding. For a moment, Alex wondered if it had all been a dream, but the photograph in their hand told a different story. On the back of the photo, new words had appeared. "It's not over." Alex stared at the photograph in their trembling hands. The new words scrawled on the back standing out like an accusation. "It's not over." The car's interior felt suffocating, the air too thick to breathe. Despite every instinct screaming at them to drive away and never look back, Alex couldn't. Something compelled them to stay, a force they couldn't name, stronger than fear. The hospital stood before them, silent and dark, like a predator waiting for its prey. Alex clenched their jaw, shoving the photograph into their pocket. "If it's not over," they muttered under their breath, "then I'll end it myself." The lobby was just as empty as before, the faint hum of the overhead lights now a familiar companion. This time, Alex noticed the details they had missed during their previous visits, the faint stains on the tiles, the crack running along the ceiling, and the peculiar scent of antiseptic mixed with something metallic. The laminated rules were gone from the reception desk, replaced by a single sheet of paper taped to the monitor. It bore only one word: down. Alex's stomach churned as they stared at the word. The elevators at the far end of the lobby seemed to gleam in the dim light, their steel doors like mirrors reflecting the empty space. Summoning their courage, Alex approached the elevator. The doors slid open silently, revealing an interior bathed in flickering fluorescent light. There were no buttons inside, only a single lever, painted red and slightly worn from use. Alex hesitated, but the hospital seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for their decision. Finally, they stepped inside and pulled the lever down. The doors closed, and the elevator began to descend. The ride felt endless. The walls seemed to close in, the light overhead flickering erratically. Alex gripped the railing, their knuckles white. Somewhere in the distance, a faint tapping sound began, growing louder with each passing second. Just as Alex thought they couldn't take it anymore, the elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit corridor, its walls lined with old, rusted pipes that dripped water onto the cracked floor. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the stench of mildew and decay. The corridor stretched on endlessly, disappearing into darkness. Alex stepped out, the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving them alone in the oppressive silence. A sign hung crookedly from the wall, its letters faded but still legible. Sublevel 3, restricted access. Alex's flashlight flickered as they moved forward. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe at the edges of their vision. The first room they passed was a storage area filled with old medical equipment, rusted wheelchairs, broken stretchers, and outdated monitors were piled haphazardly, as if abandoned in a hurry. Alex shone their flashlight over the mess, but nothing seemed out of place until they noticed the mirror. It was cracked and discolored, its surface covered in faint smudges that resembled fingerprints. As Alex's flashlight beam passed over it, their reflection appeared. But it wasn't their reflection. The figure in the mirror wore Alex's face, but its eyes were empty voids. and its mouth twisted into a cruel smile. It raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. Alex stumbled backward, their heart racing, but the reflection didn't move. Instead, it mouthed 3 words: "Leave or stay." Alex turned and fled, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow corridor. Further down the hall, Alex encountered another door. This one was labeled "Patient Records." The doorknob was cold to the touch, and as Alex pushed it open, the hinges groaned like a dying animal. Inside, the room was filled with filing cabinets, their drawers pulled out and papers scattered across the floor. A single desk lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward Alex. On the desk lay a thick file labeled Experiment 47A, terminated. Alex hesitated before opening it, their hands shaking. The first page contained a photograph of a young boy with hollow eyes, a boy Alex recognized immediately. The accompanying text detailed a series of unethical experiments conducted on patients, including the boy. The notes described him as Patient Zero, the first subject to display unusual abilities following exposure to an experimental treatment. The final entry was brief and chilling. Patient deceased. Apparent self-awareness persists. Further containment required. Alex slammed the file shut, their stomach churning. The boy wasn't just a ghost. He was something far worse, something that had been created within these walls. The tapping sound returned, louder and more insistent. Alex spun around, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The hallway was empty, but the sound grew closer, as if something unseen was approaching. Suddenly, the tapping stopped, replaced by a low, raspy voice. "Do you see me?" Alex's blood ran cold. They turned slowly, their flashlight revealing the woman with no face standing in the doorway. She held the X-ray film in her outstretched hand, her head tilted unnaturally. "Do you see me?" she repeated, her voice echoing unnaturally. Alex didn't answer. They backed away, their heart hammering in their chest. The woman took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. "Do you see me?" The lights flickered, and when they stabilized, the woman was gone. The corridor ended in a heavy steel door marked Containment. Alex hesitated, their hand hovering over the handle. Something told them that whatever lay beyond this door was the source of everything. The whispers, the shadows, the haunting figures. Taking a deep breath, Alex pushed the door open. The room beyond was massive, its walls lined with observation windows. Each window revealed a different scene: hospital staff frozen in time, patients screaming silently, and shadows writhing in endless loops. In the center of the room stood the man in the white coat. His back was to Alex, but he turned slowly as they entered, his hollow eyes locking onto theirs. "You came," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Good. We've been waiting." Alex clenched their fists, their fear giving way to anger. "What do you want from me?" The man tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "To finish what we started. You're part of this now." "I never agreed to this," Alex shouted. The man smiled, his teeth unnaturally sharp. "It doesn't matter. You belong to us." The room began to shift, the walls twisting and warping as shadows poured in from every direction. Alex felt the air grow heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The man in the white coat stepped closer, his hollow eyes boring into Alex's soul. "Do you see us now?" Alex screamed as the shadows consumed them. When Alex woke, they were lying in their car, parked in the hospital lot. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the city. For a moment, Alex thought it had all been a nightmare, but the photograph in their lap told a different story. On the back of the photo, new words had appeared: "You can never leave." Alex gripped the photograph tightly, their hands trembling. The words "you can never leave" seemed to pulse on the paper, as though alive. Every fiber of their being screamed at them to drive away, to abandon the hospital and never return. Yet, deep down, they knew it was impossible. The hospital wasn't just a building, it was a presence, something that had entwined itself with Alex's very existence. Even now, as sunlight bathed the parking lot, Alex felt the pull of the shadows within, whispering, beckoning. They couldn't escape it, but they could fight it. The decision was made before Alex fully realized it. They slammed the car door shut and marched back toward the hospital, their steps firm and deliberate. The fear that had gripped them for so long had transformed into a simmering anger, a desperate need for answers. The lobby was unchanged, silent, oppressive, and utterly lifeless. Alex's eyes scanned the space, half expecting to see the laminated rules again, but the desk was empty, save for a single key lying in the center. The key was old, its surface tarnished and worn. Attached to it was a tag that read, Basement Level 4. Alex hesitated, their mind racing. They hadn't even known there was a fourth basement level, but the key felt significant, as though it was the final piece of a puzzle they hadn't yet solved. Taking a deep breath, Alex grabbed the key and headed for the elevators. The elevator ride was suffocatingly silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Unlike the ride to Sublevel 3, this descent was smoother. The lights overhead steady and unblinking. The lever from before was gone, replaced by a single button marked 4. Alex pressed it, their heart pounding. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity. The walls seemed to close in, and the faint hum of the machinery grew louder, almost deafening. Finally, the elevator shuddered to a stop, and the doors slid open. The corridor beyond was unlike anything Alex had seen in the hospital. The walls were lined with black tiles, polished to a mirror-like sheen. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting distorted reflections that twisted and shifted unnaturally. Alex stepped out cautiously, the key clutched tightly in their hand. The first door Alex encountered was marked Observation. They turned the key in the lock and pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with monitors and recording equipment. The screens displayed grainy footage of various parts of the hospital, corridors, operating rooms, and patient wards, but none of them showed any signs of life. In the center of the room was a single monitor, larger than the rest. Its screen displayed static at first, but as Alex approached, the image began to resolve. It was the MRI room. Alex leaned closer, their breath catching. The room on the screen was empty, but something about it felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper, the angles sharper. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and a figure stepped inside. It was Alex. They stumbled backward, their heart racing. The Alex on the screen moved cautiously, mirroring their own movements from earlier shifts. But as the figure approached the MRI machine, something shifted. The reflection in the monitor wasn't Alex anymore. It was the twisted version of them, the dark-eyed, grinning reflection that had haunted the mirrors. The screen went black, shaking. Alex left the observation room and continued down the corridor. The air grew colder with each step, the silence oppressive. The next door they encountered was labeled Containment, Authorized Personnel Only. The key turned easily in the lock, and the door creaked open. The room beyond was massive, its walls lined with rows of glass chambers. Each chamber contained a figure, their forms frozen in unnatural poses. Some were hospital staff, their faces contorted in expressions of terror. Others were patients, their bodies twisted and deformed. Alex's stomach churned as they approached one of the chambers. The figure inside was a young boy, his hollow eyes staring blankly ahead. It was the boy with no shadow. A plaque beneath the chamber read, Patient 0A active. Alex stumbled backward, their breath coming in short gasps. The boy's eyes shifted, locking onto theirs. His lips moved silently, forming words Alex couldn't hear. The lights flickered, and when they stabilized, the chamber was empty. Panic set in as Alex fled the containment room, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow corridor. The black tiles seemed to ripple underfoot, and the distorted reflections in the walls moved independently of their own. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths. A sign pointed left, labeled Administration, while the right path was marked Experimental Wing. Something about the experimental wing drew Alex in, a pull they couldn't resist. They turned right, their hands trembling as they pushed open the heavy door at the end of the hall. The room beyond was a laboratory, its counters cluttered with beakers, charts, and medical equipment. In the center of the room was an operating table, its surface stained and worn. A clipboard lay nearby, its pages filled with handwritten notes. Alex picked it up, scanning the contents. The notes detailed a project labeled the Shadow Initiative. They described experiments designed to manipulate human consciousness, to create entities that existed outside the boundaries of life and death. One passage stood out. Subjects display heightened awareness postmortem. Visual manifestations reported. Interaction deemed hazardous. The clipboard slipped from Alex's hands, clattering to the floor. The words confirmed what they already feared. The figures they had encountered weren't ghosts. They were something far worse. A low hum filled the room, growing louder by the second. Alex turned, their flashlight beam landing on the far wall. A figure emerged from the shadows, the man in the white coat. "You've come far," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "But there's still more to see." Alex backed away, their pulse racing. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled, his hollow eyes glinting. "To understand, to complete the cycle." Before Alex could respond, the shadows surged forward, engulfing the room in darkness. When the light returned, Alex was standing in the MRI room. The machine was powered on, its screen displaying a live feed of the containment chambers. The man in the white coat stood beside them, his presence cold and suffocating. "This is where it began," he said, "and this is where it ends." Alex's reflection appeared on the screen, but it wasn't their own. It was the twisted version, its dark eyes gleaming with malice. "Do you see now?" the man whispered. Alex shook their head, tears streaming down their face. "I don't understand." The man placed a hand on their shoulder, his grip icy. "You will." The screen flickered, and the reflection smiled. Alex woke in their apartment, the morning sunlight streaming through the window. For a brief moment, they thought it was over, that the nightmare had ended. But the laminated rules were on the table. A new line scrawled at the bottom. "Welcome home." Alex stared at the rules, their chest tightening. The hospital wasn't just a place anymore. It was inside them, a part of their reality, and it wasn't going anywhere. Alex's hands trembled as they held the laminated rules, their gaze fixed on the new line, "Welcome home." The words burned into their mind, a cruel reminder that the hospital hadn't let them go. No matter where they went, no matter how far they ran, its grip remained unyielding. The laminated sheet felt heavier than it should have, as though the weight of the rules themselves was a burden Alex couldn't escape. But the worst part wasn't the message, it was what followed. A faint tapping sound echoed through the apartment. Alex's heart stopped. The sound was unmistakable, the same rhythmic knock that had haunted them in the hospital. It was coming from the living room, swallowing their fear. Alex crept toward the noise, their movements slow and deliberate. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. As Alex rounded the corner, they saw it, the mirror above the fireplace. Its surface fogged and cracked. Their reflection stared back, but something was wrong. The reflection didn't move with Alex. It stood perfectly still, its hollow eyes locked onto them. Then it raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. Alex stumbled backward, their breath hitching. The reflection's mouth twisted into a cruel smile as it mouthed the words, "Let us in." The tapping stopped. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Alex avoided the mirror, unable to shake the sensation that it was watching them. Every shadow in the apartment felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the hospital's lingering presence. By nightfall, Alex was exhausted. Sleep was impossible. Every time they closed their eyes, the distorted figures from the hospital appeared, reaching for them with skeletal hands. When they finally drifted off, it was only to be jolted awake by a sharp, rasping voice whispering, "Do you see me?" The cycle continued for days. Alex's world began to unravel. The hospital's presence infected everything. Mirrors reflected things that weren't there. Shadows stretched in impossible directions, and faint whispers followed Alex wherever they went. The laminated rules never left their sight. No matter where Alex placed them, they always reappeared. The words, "Welcome home," mocking them. On the fifth night, Alex reached their breaking point. The apartment was no longer safe. Every corner held a threat, every sound a warning. Alex grabbed the laminated rules and drove to the only place that felt inevitable, the hospital. The drive was a blur, the city streets passing by like ghosts. The hospital loomed ahead, its dark silhouette a beacon of dread. Alex parked in the same spot as before. The laminated rules clenched tightly in their hands. The building seemed to pulse with life, its windows glowing faintly. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped inside. The lobby was different this time. The lights were dimmer, the air heavier. The walls seemed to shift and ripple, as though the hospital itself was alive. Alex's footsteps echoed unnaturally as they moved toward the imaging wing. The laminated rules vibrated faintly in their hands, almost as if guiding them. The control room was just as Alex had left it, though the monitors now displayed static. A single chair was pulled up to the desk, facing away. "Who's there?" Alex demanded, their voice trembling. The chair creaked as it turned. The man in the white coat sat there, his hollow eyes fixed on Alex. His expression was calm, almost serene. "You came back," he said, his voice low and measured. Alex clenched their fists. "What do you want from me?" The man tilted his head, his smile widening. "To show you the truth." The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. When they returned, Alex was no longer in the control room. They stood in a long corridor, its walls lined with black tiles. The air was thick and oppressive, the faint scent of antiseptic mingling with something metallic. The man in the white coat stood at the far end, his figure barely visible in the dim light. He beckoned to Alex, his movements slow and deliberate. Alex hesitated before following. The corridor stretched on endlessly, the walls seeming to close in with each step. The man's voice echoed, though his lips didn't move. "Do you know why you're here?" Alex shook their head. "Because you won't leave me alone." The man chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Alex's spine. "You were chosen. You've always been part of this." "What does that mean?" Alex demanded, their voice rising. The man didn't answer. He stopped in front of a door, its surface marked with the words, "Truth." "Open it," he said. Alex's hands shook as they reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in harsh, white light. Inside were rows of monitors, each displaying footage from the hospital's various wings. Patients, staff, and shadows moved through the halls in endless loops, their faces distorted and blurred. In the center of the room was a mirror, its surface pristine. Alex approached cautiously, their reflection staring back at them. "Look closer," the man whispered. Alex leaned in, their breath fogging the glass. Their reflection changed. It was the twisted version of themselves, the dark eyes, the cruel smile. But this time, it spoke. "You're not real." Alex stumbled backward, their mind reeling. What are you talking about?" The reflection stepped out of the mirror, its movements fluid and unnatural. It towered over Alex, its hollow eyes gleaming. "You were created," it said, its voice echoing. "A shadow, like us, bound to the hospital, bound to the cycle." "No," Alex whispered, shaking their head. "That's not true." The reflection smiled, its teeth sharp and gleaming. "You'll see." The room dissolved into darkness. When Alex woke, they were lying on the floor of the MRI room. The machine hummed softly, its screen displaying static. The laminated rules lay beside them, a new line scrawled at the bottom, "Become one of us." Alex sat up slowly, their mind racing. The hospital's grip was tightening, its truth becoming clearer. They weren't just a victim. They were part of the hospital's twisted reality, a creation bound to its endless cycle. But Alex wasn't ready to give in. They stumbled out of the MRI room, their determination growing. The hospital's corridors twisted and warped, but Alex pushed forward, their mindset on breaking free. The man in the white coat appeared at every turn, his hollow eyes watching silently. The boy with no shadow followed, his smile unnerving, and the woman with no face waited at each door, her X-ray film clutched tightly. "Do you see me?" she asked, her voice echoing. "Yes," Alex answered, their voice firm. "I see you." The woman tilted her head, her form flickering. Then she dissolved into shadows, her presence fading. The final door loomed ahead, marked release. Alex hesitated before opening it. The room beyond was empty, save for a single chair and a mirror. The reflection stared back at them, unchanged. "You can end this," it said, But you have to choose. Choose what? Alex asked, their voice trembling. The reflection's smile widened. Stay, and become one of us. Or leave, and carry us with you. Alex's mind raced. The choice was impossible. Either way, the hospital would never truly let them go. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped forward. I choose to fight. The reflection's smile faltered, its form flickering. The hospital's walls began to crack, the shadows retreating. The reflection reached for Alex, its hollow eyes wide with fury. You can't escape. Alex raised their hand, pressing it against the glass. Watch me. When the light returned, Alex stood outside the hospital. The building was dark and lifeless, its presence no longer oppressive. The laminated rules were gone. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt free. But as they turned to leave, a faint whisper echoed in the wind. We'll be waiting. Alex stood at the edge of the hospital parking lot, the wind whispering faintly in their ears. The building behind them was dark, its oppressive presence seemingly diminished. Yet, the faint echo of a voice lingered. We'll be waiting. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex felt a sliver of freedom. The air seemed lighter, the weight on their chest easing. But the hospital's influence wasn't so easily shaken. Alex could feel its shadow still clinging to them, a presence lurking just out of sight. Determined to find answers, Alex resolved to dig deeper, not into the hospital itself, but into its history. If the hospital wouldn't let them go, then they would learn everything about it. Knowledge was the only weapon left. The library was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the rows of shelves. Alex sat hunched over a pile of dusty records, their fingers tracing faded newspaper clippings and brittle pages from old medical journals. St. George's Hospital had a long and storied history, stretching back over a century. Originally built as a sanatorium, it had been converted into a general hospital in the mid-20th century. But beneath the surface, the records hinted at something darker. One article, dated 1947, caught Alex's attention. The headline read, Mysterious Deaths Plague St. George's Staff. The article described a series of unexplained deaths among the hospital staff, many of whom had reported strange visions and hearing voices before their untimely ends. Another document, a classified government report from 1973, detailed an experimental program conducted in the hospital's basement. The report was heavily redacted, but a few key phrases stood out: human consciousness, dimensional anomalies, and containment breach. Alex's stomach churned as the pieces began to fall into place. The hospital wasn't just haunted. It was the epicenter of something far more sinister. The next piece of the puzzle came from a journal entry written by a former hospital administrator, dated 1981. The experiments have gone too far. Patient 0 shows signs of awareness, even in death. The others are following suit. If we cannot contain them, they will consume everything. We are becoming their prisoners. Alex leaned back in their chair, their heart pounding. The figures they had encountered, the man in the white coat, the boy with no shadow, the woman with no face, weren't just ghosts. They were the remnants of failed experiments, trapped between dimensions and feeding on the fear of anyone who entered the hospital. And now, Alex was part of it. The next step was obvious. Alex needed to return to the hospital, not as a victim, but as a force ready to confront its horrors head-on, equipped with a camera, a recorder, and a notebook filled with research. Alex drove back to St. George's under the cover of darkness. The building loomed ahead, its familiar silhouette both daunting and strangely welcoming. This time, Alex felt no fear as they entered. The hospital's oppressive air seemed almost expectant, as though it had been waiting for their return. Let's end this, Alex muttered, stepping into the lobby. The laminated rules were back, taped to the reception desk. A new line had been added. You've come so far. Finish it. Alex ripped the paper from the desk, crumpling it in their fist. The hospital wasn't in control anymore. Alex was. The journey through the corridors felt different this time. The shadows still moved. The whispers still echoed. But Alex pushed forward, their resolve unshaken. The first stop was the MRI room, where it had all begun. The machine hummed softly as Alex entered, its screen displaying static. They placed the camera on a nearby counter, setting it to record. "I know you're watching," Alex said aloud. Their voice echoed in the empty room. "Come out." The static on the screen shifted, forming a distorted image of the man in the white coat. He stood motionless, his hollow eyes staring through the monitor. "You think you understand," he said, his voice low and cold. "But you don't." "Then explain it to me." Alex shot back. The man tilted his head. "You are part of us now. You always have been. The cycle must continue." "I won't let it," Alex said, stepping closer to the screen. "I'll break it." The man's smile widened, his teeth gleaming. "You can't." The screen flickered, and the image disappeared. The next stop was the containment room. Alex had avoided it before, but now, armed with their research, they felt ready to confront whatever lay within. The room was as they remembered it, rows of glass chambers, each containing a figure frozen in time. Alex approached the chamber labeled Patient Zero. The boy with no shadow stood inside. His hollow eyes locked onto Alex. For a moment, neither moved. Then the boy raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. "You don't belong here," Alex said softly. The boy's lips moved, forming a single word: "Help." Alex's breath caught. The figures weren't just trapped, they were suffering, caught in an endless loop of torment. "I'll try," Alex whispered. The final destination was the experimental wing. The room where the experiments had taken place was a chaotic mess of broken equipment and faded charts. In the center of the room stood the mirror, its surface pristine despite the decay surrounding it. Alex approached cautiously, their reflection staring back. The reflection spoke first. "You can end this." "How?" Alex demanded. The reflection's smile was haunting. "You know how." The laminated rules flashed in Alex's mind. "Become one of us." "No," Alex said firmly. "There has to be another way." The reflection tilted its head. "There isn't." The mirror began to ripple, its surface warping. Shadows poured out, twisting and coiling around Alex. The hospital's voice echoed all around them. "Join us, or be consumed." Alex's resolve hardened. They reached into their pocket, pulling out the laminated rules, holding them aloft. Alex shouted, "I choose neither." The paper burst into flames, the fire consuming it in seconds. The shadows recoiled, the hospital's voice screaming in fury. The mirror shattered, its fragments dissolving into light. When Alex opened their eyes, they were standing outside the hospital. The building was gone, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. The morning sun bathed the area in golden light, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive air Alex had known. The laminated rules were gone. The shadows no longer clung to Alex. For the first time, they felt truly free. But as they turned to leave, a faint whisper echoed in the wind. "We'll be waiting." Alex smiled faintly, their resolve unshaken. "Not anymore." And with that, they walked away, leaving the hospital and its horrors behind. Alex walked away from the empty lot, their steps steady, their heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The hospital's presence, once an unrelenting shadow, no longer clung to them. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex breathed freely. But freedom came with questions. The whispers had faded, the figures were gone, and the laminated rules had burned to ash. Yet Alex couldn't shake the lingering feeling of incompleteness. The hospital had let go. But why? It wasn't in its nature to release anyone. By the time Alex reached their apartment, the city was alive with morning sounds, birds chirping, distant traffic humming, and the faint chatter of neighbors. It was a comforting contrast to the oppressive silence of St. George's Hospital. Alex entered the apartment cautiously, half expecting to find the laminated rules waiting on the kitchen table or the mirror reflecting something it shouldn't. But the space was as it should be, normal, mundane, safe. Exhaustion hit like a tidal wave. Alex sank onto the couch, their eyes fluttering shut. For the first time in weeks, sleep came easily. The dreams were peaceful at first. Alex found themselves in a meadow, the sunlight warm against their skin. The grass swayed gently in the breeze, and a river glistened in the distance. It was idyllic, a stark contrast to the nightmares that had plagued them. But the peace didn't last. The river began to darken, its surface rippling unnaturally. Shadows emerged from the water, their forms twisting and stretching. The meadow's vibrant colors faded, replaced by a dull, lifeless gray. A voice echoed through the dream, low and familiar. "Do you think it's over?" Alex turned, their hearts sinking. The man in the white coat stood at the edge of the meadow, his hollow eyes locked onto them. Behind him, the boy with no shadow and the woman with no face lingered, their forms flickering like dying flames. "It is over," Alex said, their voice firm. The man's smile widened. "You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable." The dream shattered, plunging Alex into darkness. Alex woke with a start, their breath coming in short gasps. The room was bathed in morning light, but the warmth of the sun felt distant. The hospital's words lingered in their mind, a cruel reminder that some battles weren't so easily won. They needed closure, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered because of St. George's. The hospital might be gone, but its influence lingered. Alex spent the next few days piecing together their research, reaching out to archivists, local historians, and anyone who might have insight into the hospital's dark past. The deeper they dug, the more the truth came into focus. St. George's wasn't just a hospital, it was a nexus, a place where the boundaries between life and death had been thinned by decades of experimentation. The government's involvement in the 1970s had only exacerbated the problem, turning the hospital into a prison for entities that defied understanding. Patient Zero was at the heart of it all. The experiments conducted on him had fractured the veil, creating a ripple effect that trapped other souls in the hospital's web. The staff who had died mysteriously, the patients who had vanished without explanation, they were all casualties of the hospital's hunger. Alex's research led them to a small, abandoned chapel on the outskirts of the city. According to the records, it had once been used by the hospital staff as a sanctuary, a place to seek solace from the horrors they couldn't escape. The chapel was decrepit, its walls covered in ivy and its windows shattered. Inside, the air was cold and still, the scent of damp wood and decay filling Alex's lungs. At the center of the chapel stood an altar, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. Beneath the altar, Alex found a metal box. It was locked, but the rusted hinges gave way with a little effort. Inside was a journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. The journal belonged to Dr. Elias Moore, the lead researcher of the Shadow Initiative. The entries were erratic, the handwriting growing more frantic with each page. Dr. Moore detailed the experiments with clinical precision at first, describing the successes and failures of their attempts to manipulate consciousness. But as the entries progressed, his tone shifted. "The entities are aware. They know we are watching. They know we are trying to control them. Patient Zero, he looks at me as if he understands, as if he knows my thoughts. The others are following his lead. I fear we have unleashed something we cannot contain. The hospital itself is changing. The walls breathe. The shadows move. We are no longer in control." The final entry was chilling. "The only way to end this is to sever the tether. Burn it all. Release them, or they will consume everything." Alex closed the journal, their hands trembling. Dr. Moore had known the truth, but his warnings had been ignored. The hospital had remained standing, its horrors festering for decades. But now, Alex had the chance to finish what he had started. Returning to the site of St. George's Hospital felt surreal. The empty lot was overgrown with weeds, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. Alex stood at the center of the lot, clutching Dr. Moore's journal. The instructions were clear: a ritual to sever the tether, to release the entities trapped within the hospital's fractured dimensions. It was dangerous, but it was the only way. Alex began to prepare, gathering the materials outlined in the journal. A circle of salt was drawn on the ground, candles placed at precise intervals. The air grew colder with each step, the shadows deepening despite the midday sun. As Alex lit the final candle, the ground beneath them trembled, the air rippled, and the faint outline of the hospital began to materialize. The figures emerged from the shadows, the man in the white coat, the boy with no shadow, The woman with no face. They surrounded Alex, their hollow eyes watching silently. "You can't stop this," the man said, his voice low and cold. "You are part of us." "Not anymore," Alex replied, their voice steady. They began the ritual, chanting the words inscribed in the journal. The air grew heavier, the shadows writhing and coiling like living things. The figures screamed, their forms flickering and distorting. The hospital's presence surged, its voice a deafening roar. "You cannot break the cycle." But Alex didn't stop. They poured every ounce of strength into the ritual, their determination unshaken. The final words of the chant echoed through the lot, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The hospital dissolved into light, its walls crumbling into ash. The figures vanished, their screams fading into silence. Alex fell to their knees, the weight of the ritual leaving them drained. The lot was empty now, the shadows gone. The air was warm, the sun shining brightly overhead. For the first time, Alex felt truly free. Weeks later, Alex stood at the edge of the lot, now cleared and cordoned off for redevelopment. The nightmares had stopped, the whispers silenced. The hospital was gone, its horrors banished. But as Alex turned to leave, they couldn't shake the faintest feeling, a whisper at the edge of their mind, a shadow flickering in their peripheral vision. It was over, wasn't it? Alex stood at the edge of the empty lot, the midday sun warm against their skin. The site where St. George's Hospital had once stood was now quiet, overgrown with grass and wildflowers. Heavy machinery sat idly nearby, a sign of the redevelopment project meant to erase the hospital from the city's memory. But Alex couldn't forget. The ritual they had performed weeks ago had brought an end to the hospital's haunting presence. The laminated rules, the figures, the shadows, they were all gone. For the first time in months, Alex had slept soundly, untroubled by nightmares or whispers. Life had returned to something resembling normalcy. And yet, as Alex stared at the lot, they couldn't shake the faint sensation that something was watching them. It was subtle, a fleeting shadow in their peripheral vision, a soft whisper that vanished as soon as they turned their head. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a persistent unease, like the faint echo of a song they couldn't remember. With a sigh, Alex turned to leave. Whatever lingering effects remained, they were nothing compared to the horrors they had faced within the hospital. It was over. It had to be. The first sign that it wasn't over came 2 nights later. Alex had been dreaming of the meadow again, a place of peace and warmth, untouched by the hospital's shadow. But the dream shifted abruptly. The sky darkened, and the grass withered beneath their feet. The river turned black, and shadows began to rise from its depths. A voice, low and familiar, echoed through the dream, "We're still here." Alex woke with a start, their chest tight. The apartment was dark and silent, but the air felt heavier than usual. They sat up, running a hand through their hair. It was just a dream, they told themselves, nothing more. But as they stood to get a glass of water, their foot brushed against something on the floor. Frowning, Alex reached down and picked it up. It was the laminated rules. Their hearts stopped. The sheet was pristine, the same as it had been in the hospital, and at the bottom, a new line had been added. "You thought it was over." The next morning, Alex drove to the lot, their hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The laminated rules sat on the passenger seat, a cruel reminder of the hospital's lingering presence. When they arrived, the lot was just as they had left it, quiet and overgrown. The machinery hadn't moved, and the developers were nowhere to be seen. Alex stepped out of the car, holding the laminated sheet tightly. They walked to the center of the lot, their eyes scanning the area. Everything seemed normal, but the air felt wrong, heavy with the same oppressive energy that had once filled the hospital. "Why won't you let me go?" Alex muttered, their voice barely audible. The laminated sheet grew cold in their hands, the text shifting and warping before their eyes. The letters rearranged themselves into a single word: return. Against their better judgment, Alex began researching again. They scoured the city's archives, revisiting the journal of Dr. Elias Moore and digging deeper into the history of the hospital. One detail they had overlooked now stood out. The site of St. George's had once been a burial ground. Long before the hospital was built, the land itself was steeped in death. Its boundaries blurred between the living and the dead. The experiments conducted by Dr. Moore and his team had only amplified this connection, creating a nexus that tied the hospital and everything within it to the land. The ritual Alex had performed hadn't severed the tether completely. It had only weakened it. And now, the tether was rebuilding itself. The realization sent a chill down Alex's spine. If the hospital was returning, it wouldn't stop with them. It would continue to spread, trapping others in its endless cycle. Alex had to act before it was too late. Armed with what they had learned, Alex returned to the lot one final time. This time, they came prepared. A duffel bag slung over their shoulder contained salt, candles, and a carefully prepared ritual circle, an advanced version of the one described in Dr. Moore's journal. The air was colder than usual as Alex stepped onto the lot, the laminated rules tucked into their pocket. The whispers had grown louder, faint but insistent, like a chorus of voices just out of reach. Alex set to work, drawing the circle carefully in the dirt and placing the candles at precise intervals. As they lit the first candle, the lot seemed to shudder, the air growing heavy with anticipation. "You won't win," Alex said aloud, their voice steady. "Not this time." The shadows deepened as Alex began the ritual, chanting the words they had memorized from the journal. The candles flickered, their flames dancing wildly in the unnatural wind. The laminated rules grew warm in Alex's pocket, the text shifting again. "You can't destroy us." Alex ignored the words, focusing on the ritual. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the faint outline of the hospital began to materialize. The figures emerged from the shadows, the man in the white coat, the boy with no shadow, the woman with no face. They circled Alex, their hollow eyes watching silently. "Stop this," the man said, his voice cold and commanding. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand enough." Alex shot back. "This ends here." The shadows surged forward, trying to break the circle, but the salt barrier held. Alex's voice rose as they chanted the final words of the ritual, their determination unwavering. The ground split open, a blinding light erupting from the circle. The figures screamed, their forms flickering and distorting. The hospital's outline wavered, its presence collapsing in on itself. "No," the man shouted, his voice filled with fury. "You can't escape us." Alex raised the laminated rules, their voice firm. "I already have." The paper burst into flames, the fire consuming it in seconds. The light from the circle intensified, engulfing everything. When Alex opened their eyes, they were lying on the ground, the morning sun warm against their skin. The lot was quiet, the machinery gone. The laminated rules were nowhere to be seen, and the oppressive energy that had haunted the area was gone. It was over, truly over. Alex sat up slowly, their body aching but their mind clear. The tether had been severed, the hospital and its horrors banished for good. For the first time in months, Alex felt at peace. As they left the lot, they couldn't help but glance back one last time. The wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, their colors vibrant and alive. The shadows were gone, and the whispers silenced. Alex smiled faintly, their steps steady as they walked away. The hospital was a memory now, a dark chapter finally closed. And this time, it would stay that way.